A German officer knelt beside a captured American pack in Normandy and pulled out a thing that should not have been there. Not a map, not a code book, not a weapon. A small waxed first aid packet. Inside it was gauze, a paper envelope of white crystals, and a set of tablets meant to be swallowed with water. The officer knew what the drug was. Germany had helped give it to the world. What he could not understand was why an ordinary rifleman had it in his pocket. Because in the German army, medicine belonged to the medical service. In the American army, medicine had been pushed all the way down to the man bleeding in the dirt. That one difference, small enough to fit in a trouser pocket, says more about the two armies than a stack of strategy papers ever could. This is not the story of a miracle powder. It is the story of who was trusted to use it. The chain began far from any battlefield. In the early 1930s, at Bayer's laboratories in Elberfeld, a German physician named Gerhard Domach was testing chemical dyes on infected mice. Domach had seen the old kind of death. He had served as a medical orderly in the First World War, where men survived the bullet, then died days later because dirt, cloth, metal splinters, and bacteria entered the wound. A scratch could become blood poisoning. A leg wound could become gangrene. A child with scarlet fever could simply fade while doctors watched. Medicine could clean, medicine could cut, medicine could wait. But once certain bacteria spread inside the body, there was almost nothing it could do. Domach wanted a chemical that could travel through a living body and kill the invader without killing the patient. Paul Ehrlich had dreamed of that kind of treatment decades earlier and called it a magic bullet. Domach was looking for one inside a family of industrial dyes. In 1932, one red compound did something no one in that room could ignore. 12 mice infected with lethal streptococci were given the dye. They lived. The untreated mice died. The compound would become known as Prontosil. Then, in 1935, the experiment came home. Domach's own daughter, Hildegard, fell gravely ill after a needle puncture became infected. Doctors had no real answer for the streptococcal infection moving through her body. So her father gave her the red dye. She survived. The dye stained her skin a reddish color for a time, but she lived. And with that, a laboratory result became something larger. It became proof that a chemical drug could cure a bacterial infection inside a human being, not just disinfect a table, not just clean a wound, cure the infection inside the body. But the most important part of Prontosil was not discovered in Germany. It was discovered in Paris. At the Pasteur Institute, French researchers took the red compound apart and found the trick. Prontosil was not the real weapon. Inside the body, it broke down. The red portion was mostly color. The active part was a smaller, colorless compound called sulfanilamide. And sulfanilamide was not protected by a new patent. It had been known for years as part of dye chemistry. That meant the drug could not be locked inside one company's vault. No single firm, no single nation, no single army could own it. Once the finding was public, sulfa drugs became everybody's problem and everybody's opportunity. Britain made them. France made them. The United States made them on a scale that only a mobilizing American industry could attempt. Before the war, American production was already hundreds of thousands of pounds. By 1942, it had climbed into the millions. Companies that normally competed with each other were now feeding the same military machine. Tablets, powder, packets, crates, labels, instructions. A German discovery, opened by French chemistry, had become an American industrial product. But industry alone did not make the American choice unusual. A factory can make a drug. It takes a doctrine to decide who gets to touch it. By 1941, before the United States had even entered the war, the Army was packing crystalline sulfanilamide powder into the standard first aid packet issued to every soldier. The packet was simple by design. Small enough for a pocket, sealed against moisture, packed with a sterile compress, marked so a wounded man would know which side went against the wound, and tucked inside was a paper envelope of sulfa powder that could be torn open and shaken directly onto the injury. Then came the tablets. At first, sulfanilamide tablets. Later, sulfadiazine tablets. They were carried separately in the soldier's belt gear, so a man had more than one source of treatment on his own body. The technical details mattered, but the revolutionary part was not the gauze. It was not the envelope. It was not even the drug. The revolutionary part was the instruction. In 1943, the War Department published Basic Field Manual 2111, First Aid for Soldiers. It was written for soldiers, not surgeons, not battalion doctors, not only medics. The manual told a rifleman what to do for himself or another soldier when no medical personnel were nearby. It showed a soldier sprinkling sulfa powder into a wound. It told him to dress the wound. It told him when to swallow the tablets with water. It told him when not to swallow them, especially with wounds to the abdomen or throat. It assumed he would act. That assumption is the center of the story. Every American soldier who went through training was taught that first aid began before the medic arrived. It began in his own hands, under shell fire, in mud, on a landing beach, in a frozen wood line. The German army saw the same drug and built a different answer. Its medical system was not careless. It was not primitive. In many ways, it was excellent. It was professional, layered, and carefully organized around evacuation. A wounded German soldier moved through a chain. First, the forward wounded nest near the fighting. Then the troop dressing station, where trained medical personnel and a medical officer appeared. Then the main dressing station farther back, where surgery could happen. Each stage had its role. Each role had its training. Each treatment had its proper place. And Sulfa belonged inside that chain. The ordinary German rifleman carried a field dressing, gauze, bandage, a way to cover the wound until the system reached him. He did not normally carry sulfa powder to pour into his own wound. He did not carry tablets as a personal tool in the same American sense. In his system, he was the patient. The medical service was the provider. That difference sounds small until the medic is dead. The stretcher bearers are pinned down, and the nearest medical officer is somewhere behind the smoke. Here is the paradox. The German army trusted initiative in battle. Its junior leaders were famous for acting without waiting for permission when the tactical situation changed. A sergeant might be expected to seize a crossroads, redirect a squad, exploit a gap, or save a position by judgment alone. In combat, initiative was a virtue. But medical initiatives stopped at the boundary of credentialed expertise. A German non-commissioned officer might be trusted to take a village. He was not automatically trusted to medicate a wound. The American army, messy and uneven as it was, crossed that line. It gave the drug to the bottom of the formation. Then it gave the bottom of the formation permission to use it. That permission fit the men it was issued to. American soldiers came out of a country where ordinary people were expected to solve practical emergencies before a specialist arrived. Farm boys fixed machines because the field would not wait. Small-town volunteers fought fires because there was no professional fire company close enough. Mechanics rebuilt engines in sheds. Older brothers bandaged younger brothers. Neighbors pulled cars out of ditches. Some of that self-reliance was myth. Some of it was real. But enough of it was real that when a manual told a soldier, "You are responsible for yourself and the man beside you," it did not sound like a revolution. It sounded like common sense. The Sulfa packet was not just a medical item. It was a tool issued to a population already used to tools. The first major American wartime encounter with Sulfa came on the morning of December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor was not a tidy battlefield. It was burning oil on water. It was sailors with blast wounds and shrapnel wounds and compound fractures arriving faster than hospitals could sort them. At Tripler and the Naval Hospital, military and civilian surgeons worked through impossible hours. They cut away dead tissue. They cleaned wounds. They applied sulfa powder before casts were set. Pearl Harbor reinforced the idea that sulfa had a place in combat medicine. But it was still mostly a hospital lesson. The powder was being used by surgeons. The foxhole test came later. North Africa gave it to them. In February 1943, at Kasserine Pass, the American Army met the German Army and was badly hurt. Units broke. Command failed. Equipment was lost. Men were killed, captured, and scattered. German officers saw the result and concluded that the Americans had machines, not fighting instinct. But Kasserine also revealed something the Germans underestimated. The Americans learned fast. After the defeat, the Army tightened training, logistics, command, and battlefield care. Men who had survived told replacements what mattered. Keep your first aid packet. Use the powder. Take the tablets. Help the man next to you. That message moved through the Army not as a speech, but as trench knowledge. One soldier telling another soldier what he believed had kept him alive. By Sicily, Italy, and then Normandy, the system had hardened. Company aidmen became central figures inside rifle units. A medic might be assigned close to a platoon, carrying extra bandages, morphine plasma, tourniquets, and more sulfa. But the medic was not the first link. The first link was the wounded man. The second link was the buddy next to him. Only then came the aidman. That order mattered. It meant life-saving action did not have to begin at the battalion aid station. It began wherever the bullet landed. On D-Day, that principle appeared in one of the quietest places in Normandy. In the village of Angoville-au-Plain, two American airborne medics, Robert Wright and Kenneth Moore, found a small stone church and turned it into an aid station. The airborne drop had scattered men across the countryside. Units were broken into fragments. Orders were incomplete. The front line moved through the village again and again. Wright and Moore kept working. They treated American paratroopers. They treated German soldiers. They treated French civilians. They made one rule: no weapons inside the church. For 3 days, the pews became stretchers. Blood stained the wood. German troops came in, saw their own wounded lying beside Americans, and let the work continue. Wright and Moore were medics. But the larger fact is this: the system trusted young enlisted men, far from senior supervision, to decide what humanity required in the middle of battle. That same system had already trusted ordinary riflemen with medicine in their pockets. The pattern was the same from the foxhole to the church. The person closest to the wound had to be allowed to begin. In the Pacific, the same idea moved through a harsher world. Navy corpsmen with Marine units carried bandages, morphine, plasma, splints, scissors, and sulfa. But every Marine also had his own packet. On islands where jungle rot, dysentery, malaria, heat, and infection could disable a unit as surely as enemy fire, decentralized care was not a luxury. It was survival infrastructure. A man could not always be evacuated quickly. The terrain did not permit it. The enemy did not permit it. The weather did not permit it. So treatment had to begin with whoever was already there. And sometimes that meant a wounded man treating himself. No American medic embodied that principle more dramatically than Desmond Doss. Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist and a conscientious objector. He entered the Army as a medic and refused to carry a weapon. Men mocked him for it. Officers tried to get rid of him. Then Okinawa made their judgment look very small. At Hacksaw Ridge, under machine gun fire, mortar fire, and grenades, Doss crawled to the wounded again and again. He dressed them, dragged them, lowered them down a cliff by rope. When his unit pulled back, he stayed. One more, he reportedly prayed. Then one more after that. He is credited with saving roughly 75 men. When a grenade wounded him, he treated himself. When another man needed the litter more, Doss gave it up. When a bullet shattered his arm, he splinted it with a rifle stock and crawled toward help. He had no weapon, but he carried the Central American assumption deeper than almost anyone. Do not wait for permission to save the man beside you. Then came Bastogne. In December 1944, the German Ardennes offensive tore through American lines. The 101st Airborne was rushed into the Belgian crossroads town. Its medical company set up outside the perimeter and was overrun almost immediately. The division lost its main surgical capability, much of its equipment, and many of its trained medical personnel at the worst possible moment. Inside Bastogne, the remaining medics improvised. Garage became aid stations. Cellars became treatment rooms. Plasma froze. Morphine needles stiffened in the cold. Supplies dropped by parachute had to be pulled in under shell fire. For days, the medical system inside the surrounded town was not a building. It was not a neat chain. It was the surviving people who still knew what to do with what they had. 2 doctors here, a dental officer there, aidmen moving through snow, riflemen tearing open their own packets. That was the American model stripped to its bones. Not perfect, not clean. Not always medically correct. But hard to kill because it did not live in one tent or one staff office. It lived in thousands of pockets. It lived in training. It lived in permission. After the war, American medical observers compared the two systems directly. The German chain was professional and structured. Treatment moved backward through echelons. Sulfa was administered under medical supervision. The American chain did that too, but it added something before the chain began. A 0 point, the first seconds, the wounded soldier and the man next to him. That was the decisive design choice. Germany asked, "How do we move the wounded man to the medicine?" America asked, "How do we put some of the medicine on the wounded man before the system even arrives?" The results are easy to overstate, so they should be stated carefully. Sulfa did not single-handedly cut battlefield deaths in half. No honest account can say that. Survival improved because of many things at once. Better surgery, faster evacuation, blood plasma, sanitation, training, jeep ambulances, air evacuation, and by 1944, penicillin, made in enormous quantities and sent forward to Allied medical units. Some surgeons were never fully convinced that sulfa powder in open wounds did what soldiers believed it did. By late 1944 and early 1945, American doctors were turning against the practice of sprinkling crystalline powder directly into wounds. The powder could irritate tissue. It could behave like a foreign body. Combined with tablets, it could push dangerous doses. As penicillin became available, the white powder began to disappear from frontline wound practice. So the object that became iconic was also temporary. The powder was not the final answer, but the principle outlived it. That is the real turn. The Americans eventually changed the medicine. They did not change the trust. Modern soldiers carry far more advanced individual first aid kits. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, airway tools. Combat lifesaver training teaches non-medical troops to do things no Second World War rifleman would have been asked to attempt. But the logic is the same. The first life-saving decision may not belong to the doctor. It may belong to the person already kneeling beside the wound. Gerhard Domach died in 1964. He eventually received the Nobel recognition the Nazi government had once forced him to refuse. The drug that began as a red dye helped open the age of antibacterial medicine. He never saw the beaches where American soldiers carried descendants of that discovery in their pockets. He never stood in the church at Angoville-au-Plain, where Wright and Moore treated enemies and friends under the same roof. He never saw Bastogne, where frozen packets, exhausted medics, and improvised aid stations kept a surrounded division functioning. But the line is there, from the laboratory bench, to the factory floor, to the field manual, to the pocket of a 20-year-old infantryman who might not know the name Domag and might not care. He only knew the packet was his. That is what startled the Germans. Not that the Americans had the drug. Not that American industry could make mountains of it. Those things were understandable. What was harder to understand was the trust. A German medical system put expertise in the hands of experts. An American medical system pushed a piece of that expertise down to everyone. One approach was orderly, the other was messy, one was credentialed, the other was distributed. And in the first minutes after a man was hit, messy and distributed could be the difference between action and waiting. The powder did not make every soldier a doctor. It made every soldier responsible, and that responsibility, folded into a waxed packet no larger than a deck of cards, may have been the most powerful medical idea either army carried into the war.